This week, I'm lucky to have a conversation with Travis Motl, who is the host of the popular Elbows Tight podcast, where he walks brand new Brazilian Jiu Jitsu white belts like he used to be through the process of getting started, and he's now a blue belt. He continues to interview high-level Jiu Jitsu practitioners. We have a great talk. Travis and I have a lot of commonalities. We're both U.S. Navy veterans, practice Jiu Jitsu. We're both blue belts. I'm a bit older. I'm that older grappler he mentions on his podcast, but I think you'll find this conversation both entertaining and enlightening about Travis and his life, and about Jiu Jitsu, how Jiu Jitsu reflects what's going on in your life, and about podcasting, growing a show, and really the path for Elbows Tight and to become more than just a podcast, more than a YouTube show. So thanks so much for tuning in. Check out kevtalkspod.com for more information, elbowstight.com to check out Travis and the movement he's creating over there in Elbows Tight. So thanks so much. Thanks for coming to the Kev Talks podcast. Here you'll lead industry-leading best practices in program, project, and all-hazard incident management with a dash of jiu-jitsu and a smidge of health and wellness. So whether it's a solo episode with me, Kevin Pinnell, or one of my fantastic guests, the focus is on people, how we can share our processes so that you and I can make progress together. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back into this episode. There we go. Cool. In 3, 2, 1. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming back to the Kev Talks podcast. This is episode 29, Keeping Your Elbows Tight with Travis Motl, who is a fellow podcaster, Jiu-Jitsu Blue Belt, which means we talk about Jiu-Jitsu all the time to everybody that'll listen, father and U.S. Navy veteran. Travis, thanks so much for being here. It's good to connect, man.
Hey, thank you, Kev, for bringing me on. I'm super excited about this all day today, my family, because I've been traveling, like I told you, with my family all day today. They're like, Travis needs to be at somewhere. He has a podcast at 12. I'm like, it's okay. Do not cater around my interview. Like, we can do whatever we want. I promise. So,
it is funny. That is the great thing about one, I think podcasting is just cool, obviously, because I do it. I assume you like it as well. And then, because it's like you can stop, you can pause, like we did a little bit ago. It's not like a radio show where you're like, crap, we're live on air. That just went out everywhere. So, but yeah, it's cool of them to do. And like we were talking about, I used to be such a fanatic about like sound and don't make noise. And now we're living life, post COVID, we'll say, post big part of COVID or whatever. And I think from everybody being home, being on calls and having life come into your calls, it's like, ooh, podcast, whatever.
No, I when we record, I typically try to do it like when my kids are sleeping. That way it's just a little less noise. But that doesn't always work out, and so sometimes they're screaming in the background, my dog's barking, someone rang my doorbell, and same thing with you. It's like I was like, oh man, now I got to edit all that out. I got to stop talking for a second. But I've come to realize after talking to listeners, they're like, oh, we don't care. They're like, you're in your house. It's not like you're in a podcast studio. So it's okay with us. So
they're going through the same stuff. Where I'm now, we in the past year or so finished above our garage, and we have a garage gym, which is like right below me. So my oldest, who's 16, which is great. He's active, he works out and all that stuff. But I've been in here sometimes and I start to pump, and then, the weight's hitting. I'm like, dude, I just talked to you about, but to that point. But yeah, it's so cool to connect. It's this to me is one of the positives about social media. Right. When you follow each other, stuff shows up in your feed and you're like, oh, that is actually similar to things I like, clickbait or whatever. And so I think we were talking about this. I don't remember if something from y'all's show popped up or I posted something. We both post obviously about jiu-jitsu a lot and talk about exercise. So one, I think that's cool because it's a good subject between, fitness and jiu-jitsu is just great to get out in the world more. So it was cool to connect and reach out and have you come on. So
yeah, absolutely. I'm excited.
So you're traveling today, so you're not where you are from, or are you where you're from? Where are you today? And I guess, where are you from originally?
We're in Minneapolis right now. I'm flying out tomorrow morning, back to you're good, man. To the Seattle area. I'm not originally from Seattle either, but I moved up there because of the Navy in 2014 and met a girl and stayed.
Yeah, there you go.
Then, but I grew up in Vegas and joined the Navy out of Vegas. So once I moved up to Washington, I was like, I'm not going to stay here forever. I'm just going to get out of the Navy and dip out. But life has crazy plans, so I'm up there. So
a sailor that fell in love with a girl and then stayed there. I've not heard that.
What a crazy story, right?
Yeah. It's interesting from Vegas with all the oceans around there. What prompted you to join the Navy, being growing up from around there?
So when I was in give you kind of like a not so long-winded answer.
Cool.
When I was growing up, cool. Like,
Yeah,
I don't want to hear that.
yeah.
No. So growing up, my uncle was a welder, and my parents were like, "Hey, we won't be able to send you through college, so you need to find some way to pay for college if you want to go." And they were also very blunt with me. They're like, "You should probably pick up a trade too while you're at it." And I was like, "Okay." So my uncle was a welder, so I picked up welding. I went to a trade school in high school along with
Cool.
my normal high school. So half my day was in trade school, half my day was in normal high school. And when I was in my trade school, my welding teacher was like, "Hey, look, if you guys want to make a welding career, you should do it too. There's two ways you should do it. You should either join the pipe fitters union or you should join the Navy." And I graduated in '08. So that tells you how young I am. But I graduated in '08, and what happened in '08? The housing market crash, the Great Recession, all that stuff, right? And so the pipe fitters union is like, "Well, we don't have work, so we're not hiring." And I was going through some hard stuff in life, and I walked over to my dad's house, who lived in the same apartment complex as me at 18 years old, and I was like, "Hey, Dad, I think I'm joining the Navy." And he's like, "All right, get in the truck before you change your mind," because he's an Air Force vet. So
Okay.
he was like, "All right, let's join the Navy." And so I joined the Navy as a welder, did 7 years, and loved it, had a blast, was successful at it. I picked up E6 in under 6 years.
Wow.
Got out after just under 7 years, and never looked back. So now I work for Uncle Sam again, though.
That's cool. Yeah. So was it the Air Force that took you all to Vegas with your dad?
No, so the Air Force took my dad to Vegas, and he met my mom there. And then my mom got pregnant with me, and my dad was about to get orders to Korea, but he decided to get out and raise a family in Vegas. So,
gotcha. Cool. Were you pretty well prepared before your A school? Because you already knew how to weld a bit before you got in the Navy.
Yeah, it was pretty cool because I showed up and I had been welding already since I was like 16, and I was 19 at the time that I was in A school. So, that was like 2.5, 3 years of experience already.
Mm-hmm.
And then also I was in if you guys are listening at home, know anything about the Navy, I was in the ATF program, Advanced Technical Field. So I signed a 6-year contract for automatic E4 and a guaranteed C school for 6 years, signing for 6 years. And so I didn't fully understand what that meant, but I knew I wanted to be a welder, and I thought I wanted to do 30 years, excuse me. But while I was there, it was definitely much easier for me for the welding. What's funny is, like, as a whole tech, we do very little welding in school, like because we're such a jack of all trades. We're welders, we're carpenters, we're plumbers, firefighters, you name it, the trades, and we pretty much have our hand in it. So, they have to. And then also we're in engineering, so we have to learn the engineering side of the Navy and everything like that. So there wasn't much welding, but there's like 2 weeks that we did of welding. I was like, okay, finally something that I'm good at.
That's awesome. Yeah, and making E6 that fast is great. Like, I made E5 right before I got out. I was in just under 6 years. I was definitely one of those folks that did not take the promotion process serious the first few times, and I was like, and then not to me, but when I made E4. And then my buddies did, and I realized, and they were like, a little snarky because that it changes things depending on your pals and things, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I want to put a little more time and effort into this stuff. I was a corpsman, so it was like, okay, did I study all the different gases that can kill us, all the random stuff, which I get is important at some point, but it's amazing what they put on the advancements exams. That contract too sounds great, like a guaranteed C school. And for listeners, so usually go in, right, boot camp at A schools, your basic, if you qualify for that. Some folks don't even qualify for that, but here's your basic trade. So like I went to core school, and then the C school was like, all right, what's your advanced on top of that? And get that guaranteed E4 is pretty amazing, but you still got to put a ton of work in it, especially to make E6. It sets you up to be like an LPO for a whole, section. That's awesome, man. Leading pedals.
Yeah, I was I made E6 and I was like 24 years old.
Jeez.
You know what I mean? So I was like, so I was like, holy crap, I can't believe I'm an LPO. I'm 24 years old. I'm telling these guys that are older than me what to do, writing them up, writing evals and stuff like that. And I would have never experienced that. level of leadership if it wasn't for the Navy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. How did you find folks receive that? Was it a mixed bag?
Um, no, I never really. No, I never had anyone that really had any animosity towards me. I was a young, cocky kid, and it was when I probably made E6 that it finally started to be a little more level headed.
Okay.
But like as a third and second class, I knew my shit didn't stink. I knew I was good at what I did, and I let it get to my head. And I definitely didn't burn any bridges, but I probably could have had better relationships with the people I worked with if it wasn't for that kind of that attitude. But then once I made E6 and I like the whole dynamic of my career changed because it became way more political. It wasn't necessarily fun for me anymore.
Right.
And so I kind of just approached it as, well, there's no reason for me to take a lot of this stuff too seriously because it's just not for me anymore. So I just try to build a lot of like personal relationships with people, even when, there was conflict within my office or I had to reprimand someone or something like that for messing up. I try to do it as like humanly as possible because,
Right.
I'm sure you experienced it in the military. A lot of guys, they get that power trip of, they're like, I tell you what to do and you listen to me and you messed up and you're a piece of trash. And you know what I mean? And I never approached it that way because I didn't like when people did that to me.
Yeah.
And it's very dehumanizing. And we're already away from our families in stressful environments, doing hard work. We don't need to add that dynamic of shit, man. Now I can't even make a mistake because my LPO, my chief, or whatever, my supervisor is just going to take it to the extreme. You know what I mean? So once I picked up and was like an LPO, I was like, look, guys, we're all humans. We're adults. We have lives outside and stuff. And so I just try to approach it that way. And even though I was a real young cat, it was, I think that's really what helped out a lot to build rapport with everyone that I was in charge of.
That makes sense. Yeah. So I learned that lesson too. I think I was in core school, and they have kind of your temporary. You can be the LPO of the class or assistant. And I was one of the assistant petty officers for the class. And yeah, I let it get to my head. A buddy of mine like was joking around. We're supposed to be in formation, etc. And I totally did like what do you raising voice. And then down the line when I was LPO of like critical care and different things, you're like, dude, it's not about that at all. And it makes a big difference, right? But great lesson. I got to write a nice 5-page paper on leadership from my core school class proctor. Who was like, hey, we heard this thing happen. I was like, yeah, sorry, and knew it. So yeah, good lessons learned. And to your point, I was just listening to Jocko podcast, and he's got another military leader on there talking about the skills you take from the military, right? Leadership being one of them, which is huge. And it's so true. And so it seems like your transition from the Navy, career wise is pretty directly applicable, like to what you do now. Were you able to make good connections with kind of the civilian side of the house before you were discharged?
Yeah, I thought, and that was another thing. I thought I worked at in Bangor, Washington. I worked on the submarines and, I worked side by side with civilians. And so when I got there, I was like, oh man, this is what I want to do when I get out. So I'm going to try to be as, nice as possible, build a lot of relationships with these people. And after working there for like 6 months, I was like, this is not what I want to do. These people get treated worse than we do. They get told that they're working the weekends. They don't have a choice. They have to basically put in leave requests like the military does, and they can get denied. And I was like, this is not for all the civilian guys that I worked with. They're all like in their late 40s, early 50s, still doing the same job that they did when they were hired at 20 years old. You know what I mean?
Wow. Yeah.
And I was like, this is just, why would I want to do this? Like I should take the opportunity to pursue something else. And I'm glad I did, because I ended up not working. I ended up going back to the government after a couple of years, but in a GS job instead of, I work behind a desk now. But I think it would have absolutely ruined me if I would have stayed in the shop like I was. So I was like, nah, this ain't for me, bro.
Gotcha. Yeah. What do you think is the best lesson you took from your time in the Navy?
Best lesson? That's a great question.
I know one is probably hard, but that's why I asked it.
Yeah. I don't know. I think the best lesson I learned is it was probably after I left the Navy and I started to realize that the Navy does the same thing, has been doing the same thing for years. Uh, you know, we work the same duty sections, we do the same maintenance, we do all this stuff, and I feel like the a lot of people just accept the standard quo because that's how it's always been done,
Right.
right? And I left the military realizing that, like, man, it's so inefficient the way that they do a lot of things. And it made me realize that, you should listen to junior people. You should bring on new ideas. Don't gatekeep information. Like, if there's a better, easier way to do it, you should 100% try it out. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Because I felt like my time in the Navy, man, like I'd sit there. I'm like, why are we doing this? Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? I'm like, this doesn't make any sense.
Absolutely.
Like, why are we working 18 hours a day? Like, why are we not able to go home and see our family for 2-3 days at a time because there's so much work that got to be done?
Yeah.
So I think that was my biggest lesson is, like, just because it's been done the same way for so long doesn't mean it has to continue to be done the same way. You know what I mean? So that was a big eye opener. In the civilian world, when I worked in the private sector, if they saw inefficiencies, it was like, well, don't do that. Like, that's going to cost us money. You know what I mean?
Adult rules came into play, and you're like, oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. And so that's when I worked for a private engineering firm after I left the Navy. And dude, they're like, no, like, figure out a good way to do it that's going to increase profits, but still get the job done, because the Navy doesn't see it like that. They're like, how bad can we make it suck for everyone?
Yeah, for sure. Having a company that needs to make money is a big driver and that, but money drives innovation. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
So I think that's a big deal. Yeah, that's a good point. Plenty of stuff. And hopefully, over the past, at least, couple decades of combat time, things have changed and got more efficient, but I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that's still done the same way just because.
Oh yeah.
And all that. So that's cool. So yeah, Navy, definitely a lot of good lessons, good opportunity for folks out there. If you don't have other options, I'll say it's just a good option, honestly, in any military branch. And I think that's seems to be creeping in a little more these days of not like, okay, you have to go to school and you have to go to college. You have to go to college, like trade schools, the military, other services, maybe take time. I don't know. It seems, I feel like I've seen it, unless it's just, I don't know, the pages I read or people I talk to. Good, because there's no guarantee that you're going to go to college, come out with debt, and then get a great job anyway to pay off that debt. So yeah,
that's like I tell my son right now is my oldest son is like 14 and I'm like, dude, just do 4 years. Like, you don't understand the amount of benefits you get for just 4 years of your time. Like,
absolutely,
you should 100% do it. And say you join at 18, 19, you get out at 22, 23, like, you can still go to college. You can still, start a whole nother career. And now you have a lifetime of benefits from it. I just think it's I'm not for mandatory service, but I do think the youth doesn't appreciate what you do get for just 4 years. It's high school, literally an extension of high school.
Yeah. And hopefully you have the smarts to save your money, which probably won't happen. Like, I think back now, I'm 49 now. So I'm one of the older folks you talk about on your podcast about older grapplers.
Yeah.
And yes, I'm on supplements for joints and all that good stuff. But yeah, thinking about, like, I could have knocked out 20, like 10 years ago, cause I went in when I was 19, and things like that. So yeah, it's definitely, if you go in and do the time, I used the GI Bill in the college fund because they needed corpsman when I went in. So it was like, oh, and I get this. Yep. And so it covers a ton of it. And it's great. And honestly, I wasn't ready for school when I was younger anyway.
Same.
So when I went back to school, I was probably, I think it was 31 or something. I just had like a 6-month-old. So I'm like, writing papers with the baby Bjorn, like that. And so sitting in class and also perspective, right? When you hear some of the questions people ask and you're like, he or she just said that. And I'm just like, I get it, I'm older, but like they literally just said that. And I don't use literally a lot because that's also an overkilled. But yeah, it's a benefit. And yeah, to your point, you'll get to see places. You might have a sucky however many years, because some people it isn't for them. And it is eye-opening, right? They've never had challenge, maybe real challenge. They get there. I saw people freak out in boot camp, and you're like, and we're not even really into it yet. And boot camp's really not that hard.
Right.
But I've been there, so it's different than maybe someone that's going, but it's for sure worth it. The benefits you get financially, just overall professional benefits, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was to your point too, college wasn't for me when I was younger, and I'm glad I didn't go because I don't think I would have been nearly as successful as I was afterwards.
Yeah.
But yeah, during the pandemic, I decided to join college and got my bachelor's degree through the pandemic.
Oh, cool.
100% remote, 2 babies. You know what I mean? And like full-time job and everything like that. So it was, I would have not been nearly able to do that if I would have joined or done it any sooner than I did. So
that's great.
Yeah.
And shout out, I imagine some crazy support from the spouse. I know, shout out to my wife. Like, that's how I could do it, right? From them. So in addition to the Navy's money, also the spousal support is a pretty big deal. So
yeah, and having that extra money from the GI Bill too. She was like, "Can you go back to college? Like, is there any left on that?"
Yeah, seriously, it does go fast though. College is expensive.
Very true. Very, very true.
But good stuff. Cool, man. So let's jump into that jiu-jitsu. How did you get into jiu-jitsu? Like what?
So I wrestled a little bit in high school. So grappling has always been kind of like in my history. And then when I moved up to Washington, the guy that owns our academy and our gym, Cody Smith, he's a former undefeated MMA fighter and jiu-jitsu blue belt at the time. And he was talking about opening up a jiu-jitsu academy again because he wanted to train.
Oh, cool.
And so when he mentioned it to me, I was like, dude, if you do that, I'm in there like swimwear, bro. Like,
nice.
I'm ready to do it. So he opened the academy, and from day one, I've been going to the same academy.
Okay.
Been training now for 5 years coming up. So 3-stripe blue belt, and then been a blue belt for 3 years, maybe coming up on 3-4 years. So
nice.
Been a lot
scary,
of fun.
dude. It's scary. The parallels we have, almost the same track. About 4.5 years, blue belt. About 2.5 years or so. Or yeah, maybe a little longer. But and what's the name of the academy you train at?
Virtuous Grappling.
Virtuous Grappling. Look at that. You guys are really nice to each other when you're strangling each other.
Yeah. You're very respectful. You say yes sir, no sir. No, I'm sorry. Like no, yeah. Yes, Virtuous Grappling. It was Pacific Northwest Jiu Jitsu, but Cody rebranded the academy and the CrossFit side, and so it's just all under the Virtuous name. So, and because our black belt is a lifelong wrestler, he's a wrestling coach now for high school. So we have a lot of wrestling influence. So Cody didn't want to limit it to jiu-jitsu, so that's why he threw grappling in there because we do a lot of wrestling stuff too.
Yeah, which I think you have to balance it out, which I'm sure we'll touch on here in the whole gi versus no gi kind of thing. Not verse, but balance of but it's interesting that you said that he was a blue belt at the time, but then it sounds like was under a black belt, because when you think about like 20 years ago, blue belts at starting schools or purple belts had their own school because there weren't many, right? Or 20, 25, right. How long? It's probably longer now, but and then now you're like, wow, that's very unique and interesting. But he did MMA, was a blue belt, but then was under a black belt that's kind of over the school. That I got.
Yeah, he our first black belt, he was under. He was a 3rd degree. He came out, and we were under him for maybe 6 months, and Cody's values and his didn't really align once the academy started. So we dropped him, and was just Cody was a purple belt now. He got promoted to purple belt once he opened the academy.
Oh wow.
And it was just us and Gracie combatives.
Oh wow.
And Gracie online. We just came in, and Cody would study the curriculum before class, and we would sit there and we would do, super basic Gracie fundamentals for probably about the first year, 2 years. Probably about the first year. And then we had a brown belt show up, our old professor, Al. And he took over and he started training us, and he got his black belt. And so we were under him for a little bit of time. And then the pandemic hit. And he took a hiatus because he had family members that were high risk.
Oh,
And
gotcha.
so he kind of like stopped coming around. And then one day, Sean, our current black belt, came in and just mopped us up and down the mats. And
Yeah.
we're
Funny
like,
how they do that.
like, we're like, man, I thought I was a pretty decent blue belt. And he showed up and he's like, man, he's like, who gave you guys your belts, bro? And I was like, what? You know what I
Oh
mean?
no.
Like,
Yeah.
and looking back at it now, like, yeah, dude, I would like, even with me training less, not being in as good a shape, I would absolutely smash my Travis, fresh blue belt Travis. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's just my game is completely different. You know, he's a Carlson Gracie guy, so it's a whole lot of like pressure, you know, letting him cook,
Yep.
kind of just like meanness that
Yeah.
we didn't have before because it was kind of like a stoner surfer or jiu-jitsu. You know what I mean? Like kind of like flowing, like
It's
a
like
lot of
three
fun.
different things. It's either like 10th Planet Gumby, it's like stoner kind of nerd science people, or wrestling athlete people. Like there's maybe a
Yeah.
few more outliers, but yeah, there's like big chunks for sure. But, you know, it's interesting you say that because so my professor now, Tim Mannon, is directly from Henzo Gracie from the Blue Basement, which is crazy to see pictures of him with like John Danaher and Matt Serra, and like you're like, this is what we read about on the internet and books and things like that. And it's exactly that, like the, you know, at our academy, and then, you know, from Henzo, it's like smash, pass, submit. So where I came from, it was still really high level jujitsu players, but it was like we'd listen to reggae when we rolled, and it was a little more chill. And I mean, they could still murder me, but different than like, I'm gonna crush your soul until you move your legs out
Yeah.
of the way, and I'm gonna pass you. You're like, oh, which
Yeah.
teaches you, because to your point again, same thing. New blue belt Kev got tapped out by a super aggressive white belt not long after I got my blue belt, and I'm like, son of a gun. And now, yeah, I was like, I would, which is the genius of jujitsu to me, because
Yeah.
even a 6 month person could murder themselves brand new, right? White belt, brand new. And
Yep.
there's an immediate, you know, feedback. And Andrew Smith, the guy at Revolution BJJ where I started, said this too. There's a pretty immediate feedback loop or immediacy to jujitsu. Like I can show someone the basics, and we can practice that for like a month, and you're gonna school someone that just walks in. You're just gonna just, and it doesn't make sense. Like, to your point about the black belts, there's a guy, one of our black belts, that teaches me in the mornings. I do morning jujitsu, and you know, he's 160 pounds. He actually just fought yesterday, so now I know exactly how much he weighs, which makes me feel worse, but that's all right because I'm 205. And I'm like, I'm a grown man. I'm decently strong. And I thought, hey, I know, but I just know I'm going to get the gentle murder death kill
Yeah.
when I'm rolling on the mat. But I love it because you're like, man. And I think one great thing is you get to be a more mature blue belt, at least, is I can feel when I'm screwing up. I'm like, oh, my arm's out there. Oh, my neck, you know,
Yeah.
and try and go, oh, did I save myself or not? Like, nope, go crucifix you, and you look at it and you feel it.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah, it's pretty cool. So that's neat, man. The timeline. And how have you experienced the old blue belt blues
Mm,
column?
yeah, I would say so. I wouldn't necessarily say blue belt blues. Probably just more of lack of motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's your blue belt's your longest belt, right? So like I mentioned, like I've been a blue belt for like 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gone through my ebbs and flows, my ups and downs. You know, jujitsu is a roller coaster. Sometimes
Yeah.
you climb into the tippity top, and then you're like, man, this is great. And then you know, you just hit, you know, you just go for a downward spiral, whether it's like training, motivation, injuries, and stuff like that. So
Right.
I've gone through my own, and what really changed was when I was in a rut, and I was like, man, I'm sucking. Like I'm just not having fun training. I'm not enjoying what we're learning. And it wasn't even necessarily what we were learning. I just wasn't like mentally there.
Yeah.
And so I kind of like reapproached training to just being like, dude, what does it matter? Like you're doing it for fun. I don't ever plan
Mhm.
on being a world champ.
Right.
Like, why am I being so hard on myself during training? Like, you know, it's like I have when I first started, my wife and I weren't even married. You know, we lived together. We were still dating. Um, and my oldest son was like uh, maybe 10 years old when he started training with me.
Yeah.
And so it was a completely different dynamic. Now, you know, in my mid 30s. I have 3 kids, full-time job. I'm busy, you know what I mean? So it's like I had this like whole perspective change of like, I don't even care. I just want to have fun. I don't want to go to jujitsu and be like it's like a daunting task for me. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
um, and so once I changed that view and I started going to class, and I really just started like messing around in roles. You know what I
Right.
mean? And like I would try stuff or like get submitted and stuff, but it never got, it hasn't got to me since. You know, there was one there,
Good, yeah.
there was one night where I was training with Cody, our school owner, who's a brown belt now, and I hadn't trained in like a week or two because of life, and he was just like smashing me, man. I was like, holy crap, I have like nothing for you tonight. Like
Yep.
no answers, no attacks. Like my defense isn't there. You know what I mean? Just one of those nights.
Yep.
And I was like driving home, like, reflecting on it. And I was like, why am I so upset with myself? Like, is it because in my head it was like it's probably 2 reasons. One reason is am I thinking I'm better than I am? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
am I
good point.
am I looking at myself like I should be better? Like I've been doing this for so long, and Cody just smashed me. I had nothing for him, right?
Mhm.
And I was like, no, I know my jujitsu. I know that, sometimes you're gonna have your ups and downs. I was
Yeah.
like, honestly, what it was, I felt like a bad training partner. You know what I mean? Like I was like,
Yeah.
I just didn't have anything for, like, he's like, I felt like I didn't give him anything to work on in that role. Like he was
Right.
just like going through the motions with me. And that kind of upset me. I was like, man, I got to be better for my training partners. I gotta try harder for them. Like I don't want another role where it's just like me getting smashed the whole time, and afterwards they're like, thanks, rest round Randy. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
Yeah, for sure. That's a
you
good, that's
know,
a
so
very selfless approach. Yeah, because to your point, it's never fun to roll with like a grappling dummy. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Where no, I get it. I the closest I've seen it, I've experienced that more as one me similar. Like if I'm just a shit day or time period, chunk of time, whatever, and it's just like yeah, I'm mentally and physically exhausted, and I'm just kind of
Yeah.
here and I'm gonna do this. Versus like a brand new person where they're bug eyed, they're like, oh my god, what's happening, and they don't know what to do, and then I'm like, okay. And that's where, honestly, for that whole kind of breathe, frame, survive the thing, that I talk about of was literally like, look, take a breath because it sucks. I mean, as you know, when you're new, you're like, I'm gonna die. I've got like all these things, and you're like, here, make some space, do this, then I'll stop. But yeah, that's a great point as well. And it's weird, isn't it? Sometimes you're like top of your game. One thing I've found, I'd be interested for you as well, is it wasn't just the jujitsu, it's what else is going on in my life that's
Yeah.
affecting that. Because it's not just these mats and these walls and these folks, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like we always talk about like how jujitsu is a very honest thing.
Mm, yeah.
There's no hiding behind anything when it comes to you getting on the mats. If you're having a bad day, it will come out on the mats. If
Oh yeah.
you're having trouble at home, it's going to come out. If you're dishonest, if you're a cheater, whatever it is, like the mats expose that, and it really does
Yeah.
because um my life was a little bit hard at that point too, because like I mentioned, like I was so busy and like stressed at because I was gone for 2 weeks and like everything in my personal life.
Yep.
And so it being on the mats and feeling like I was, not relieving the stress, not helping other people, it was just like it just escalated it. You know what I mean? I was like,
Yeah.
man, what am I doing? So but once again, like then I had a kind of like mind shift of like, dude, it's okay. Like, don't be so
Right.
hard on yourself. Like, you're not like I try to tell people, like, you're not doing, if you're doing this to be a world champ, that's something completely different. But
Yeah.
99% of us are doing it just because we want to be around people that are like minded, train, choke each other and have
Yeah.
fun because, like, it's not
Which
that
is
big of
funny
a
because
deal.
only if you do some sort of grappling art do you say, yeah, I just tried not to get choked or my arm's broken today. And people, and it's normal. I'll
Yeah.
say that at work. And, some feedback I've gotten, since I've been doing jujitsu is, wow, you're so like calm when things happen and your voice, and I wasn't always that way.
Yeah.
And,
Same.
and I'm like, yeah, because literally I just defended people from choking me and from like, and it seems a little awkward. I'm like, no, I'm not joking. Like I did jiu-jitsu this
Yeah.
morning. They're like, oh, okay, which gives you a whole different perspective, between my time as a corpsman and public safety, and then particularly jiu-jitsu though, because again, literally, and you're right, if you're rolling and you let the outside world creep into your noggin, you're not going to do well unless you're that black belt that's just great anyway. And even them though, I'm sure it affects them, but I know I found that it's a good window into, hey, take a look at like your sleep and your hydration and your stress management and your everything else, because I know for me, like last year, I took time off a big chunk, had like family illnesses, and I wouldn't manage my stress, staying up, like all the stuff you're not supposed to do, I was doing. And then I'd wonder why on the mats I would turn away and then freak out and get I'm like, and then you look at those other things and you're like, oh, okay, it gets better. And you do what you're supposed to kind of outside the world and deal with your real world issues, so that then on the mat, it makes a huge difference in what you're able to do. And it's amazing. You can still be in the worst place, mounted, like they're, hooked your legs and you're just sitting there like this.
Yeah.
And then your mind is right though. And you're like, okay, I'm going to breathe real small, which is awful. And then try and at least do something or make it to the round without tapping. Yeah. And make that space. And there's, I mean, you and I've probably read them, talked about them, said them. There's so many metaphors for like making space in jiu-jitsu, but same thing for life. Between, I think, stress management and dealing with whatever you're dealing with, or letting that pain come in. Cause I think that's the value of jiu-jitsu too, is you're going to get hurt from or sore. You're not necessarily injured, but you're going to be sore as shit. You're going to like get bumps, black eyes, bruises all over. And that's life. Like life's going to do that to you too.
Yeah. Jason Khalipa has a book called The AMREP Mindset. And it's a great book because, he's a CrossFit Games champion, multiple times CrossFit podium and stuff. And I talked to him on our podcast, and I was like, asking him about like the AMREP mindset for jiu-jitsu. He's like, bro, that is like the ultimate an AMREP mindset is like being present in the moment, right? Like, what are you doing in the moment, right? Like an AMREP in CrossFit is as many reps as possible, right? Like you can't think of anything else besides exactly what you're doing at that moment to burn. Yeah, right. And so, that's true, because like in jiu-jitsu, like you can't think about anything else, because you can make one mistake and then like you're like, oh crap, now I got submitted, or I messed up, or something like that. And jiu-jitsu has really helped my stress and like how I handle confrontation and stuff like that too. Because like at work, people are very high strung, people like in traffic, people, speeding, cutting you off. And I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah,
like,
right.
It doesn't matter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like even this weekend, I was like telling my dad, I'm like, man, like relax, dude. It's okay. Like we're hanging out with family. You know what I mean? Like don't like we'll all get there. It's not none of it matters to a point, but it's like we don't need to be so caught up in the moment of like so it's helped out a lot in that sense for me too, because it's hard to appreciate things when you're always like on the edge of the cliff of like stress or anger, or you know what I mean? And being humbled so much like we do in jiu-jitsu, it really just knocks you down a peg constantly.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Like so that's a beautiful thing. And I always tell people too, I'm like, at work, this might sound kind of bad, but I'm sure we all have those confrontational people at work, and it's like through jiu-jitsu, I've learned like everyone can be a big tough guy until there's a threat of violence. So you know what I mean? Like, act all big bad as you want. It doesn't bother me at all. I'm not even gonna give you the time of day. Like Jocko, and like to Jocko's point too, is like, but the second someone touches you, that's different.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is a whole different thing, and it is interesting hearing folks, whether it's at parties, we're talking sports stats. I'm not like a sports stat guy, or they get into those. Well, I was just going to do this. And I'm like, awesome. And you can tell they've like not walked a mile in years. And you're like, come on, man, you're going to be gassed out in like 20 seconds.
See red, bro.
Let's see red. And knowing like, I'm not anecdotally saying you'll probably gas out. Like I see it happen all the time, so yeah, for sure. I mean, we were watching fights, and they were like regional fights here in Virginia. And, even folks that train, you start not just grappling, but grappling and throwing punches. And I trained with our black belt that fought yesterday. In one of the rounds I had boxing gloves. It was like my third or fourth round Friday. So I'm already, feeling it. And with boxing gloves, you can't grab anything. And it felt like so much more claustrophobic. Like I'm like, oh, I can't, but he wanted to kind of simulate, people punching and stuff. And it's like, man, it's just a whole nother level when you add one little element to something you actually used to that is already hard, let alone the perception that people think they're going to John Wick everybody just by like, just because they've seen the movie and they have zero training whatsoever. But yeah, that humbling piece of jujitsu, it happens every day to everybody that comes in off the street. It also, I think, is inspiring. Like we have a guy that started a few months ago. He's 65. He's lost 30 pounds. We have, and then the other spectrum, super young, real thin guy. So, and we have that smashy kind of thing. And which is always funny, being 205 and he's, probably like 140, 150. And I'm like, and we're the only ones left to partner up. I'm like, but that's also, I think it's kind of like to me akin to maturing in, I wasn't an a-hole anyway when I started jiu-jitsu, but I guess I'm less of one now is my point. But but like in the Navy, you get a little bit of power and you're young and immature leader and you abuse it. And then you as you age in the Navy and in leadership, you're like, okay, here's how I should really do this and be a better leader and help people. Same in jiu-jitsu, to just be like, hey, let's talk through some things. And I'm not really putting all my weight on you because I know that sucks. When we're seeing neon belly to arm bar and I'm like, 200 pounds and you're like, oh, or something like that. But I think that it's cool to me to see the maturity, also the maturity of people that you start with. And then to your point that, or what we talked about before, the lows of jiu-jitsu, some of that can be just like in the Navy and in life. Well, they got promoted before me. Well, what did they do to get there? And like for me, I missed a chunk of time last year too. And don't go as much as some of these other folks, and they're getting better than me or have. And it's like, why am I going to be hurt by that? Like they put extra time in, they've been consistent, and just like anything else in life, that pays off to not just rank up, but just be better when you're like, holy crap, I can see that happening now.
Yeah, I just interviewed Gustavo Dantes, who's a 6th degree black belt. Thank you. And I always finish my interviews with people. What's your one tip for a brand new white belt?
Yeah.
And he gave a perfect one. I thought it was fantastic. It was mind your own business. Like, don't worry about what other people are doing. Don't worry about other people's journeys. It's you on the mat. Like it's you that has to put in the work. Like it doesn't matter if someone started at the same time as you, got promoted faster than you, or got a stripe and you didn't. You know what I mean? Like what does it matter? That has nothing to do with you. If you didn't get it promoted, you have to do some self-reflection on like why,
for sure.
And it makes you have that like accountability issues. Like, okay, well, was I training hard enough? Like, did I actually deserve a promotion? And I feel like even like in business, that's hard for people to do, right? They see someone else get a position and they're like, oh, why did they get it? I applied for the job. How come I didn't get it? It's like, well, maybe because you weren't good.
Right. Reality check. There's usually a reason.
Yeah. And when you can't run away from if you're good or not, it's really hard to stop ignoring it. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, well, I can make excuses because X, Y, and Z. There's all the jokes like, oh, it's because he was 10 pounds heavier than me. Oh, it's because he was 10.
Right.
Oh, it's because he has a belt or two higher than me. You know what I mean? It's like, well, yes and no. But, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to improve to not have that happen? And having that mindset because of jiu-jitsu is a game changer, man, because you can literally carry it over into every aspect of your life.
Which made me think of when you're talking about, a competitor versus what a lot of folks call a hobbyist, which I don't know why being called a hobbyist is like offensive a little bit, even though it is kind of a hobby. Is it a lifestyle? You call it a journey. We can use all the buzzwords that people say about jiu-jitsu, but I feel like if I'm willing to, which I am, regularly pay to go like pit myself against other folks and learn hard things and grow, That is way more than a hobby to me right now. I'm not seeking medals. I've competed a few times, and I kind of get the analogy, but I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing that popped in my head, because you hear it, you're like, well, I'm not just a hobbyist, and you're like, yeah, but also like and to the point, like, well, you have fathers and mothers that are going there in their time while they're also working, while they're this and that. So, it's different than building models, right? Which is challenging in its own right, but very different. So it was just kind of a funky one of my funky things. What do you think? I think we've touched on some of them. If you could kind of pick one benefit with jiu-jitsu, what would be the biggest thing you would say if someone was like, well, hey, why do you do jiu-jitsu? What's the thing it does for you?
I always say that the biggest thing that I get out of jiu-jitsu is the community, the camaraderie.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the vets I talk to also, the reason they like martial arts is because the going through adversity with someone, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like in the military, we we go through hardships with a lot of people, and that's why we build that brotherhood, that sisterhood between people so strongly, because we go through a lot of hard things, and we're away from our families together and whatnot. And it's not a perfect parallel with jiu-jitsu, but if you're constantly challenging yourself with the same people over and over again, you build a strong relationship. And that's my biggest benefit to jiu-jitsu is the community that is built around it, the friendships. It's the closest thing that I've had to the military.
Yeah.
And that is the best part. If I feel that's what keeps people around training, because if you have a terrible community in your academy, it doesn't matter how many medals your black belt has. It doesn't matter how many competitions you go enter or win, how many times a week you train. If you don't enjoy the people you're going to be around, you're not going to stay. So I feel the community is the biggest benefit that comes from jiu-jitsu. Also, if you are in a good community, say you have a lot of knowledge and stuff like that, that's a huge benefit. If you're around people that want to grow, want to learn, right? Like that's such a huge benefit, But yeah, there's definitely that.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, you become a better leader and follower at the same time, right? Because even to your point, like I newer folks can have some trick, and they're like, how did you do that, or something to your point. So I think, like you mentioned earlier, like listening to newer folks and things like that, it makes a big difference. What would you say is the most frustrating aspect of jiu-jitsu?
Man,
yeah.
Where do I begin?
Right. Yeah.
No, I don't. It's hard to say. Like, I would probably say those times when you do have your lows, and you're crushing it, and it's just those one days, like in every couple months, where you're just like nothing's clicking. Right? Like you're looking at your belt like, should I put a different color on? Like, should I derank myself? Should I take a stripe off? That's the most frustrating part, right? The imposter syndrome that everyone goes through. Everyone's going to go through it when they're doing jiu-jitsu. And it's completely normal, but it's definitely those days of like, what am I doing with myself? Like, why am I still doing this? Those are hard, but everyone goes through it. You just got to just face it head on and just keep showing up, because it's not going to be like that forever. So
show up and go home and cry in the cold shower when you get there.
That's right. Or in the car, just sit in the car and put on like Sarah McLachlan and just sit there and cry.
In the arms of, for sure. Instead of a pet, it's you and your or
I'd also say the most frustrating part of one of the most frustrating parts is also taking a wet rash guard off. That is terrible. I hate that.
It's like a wetsuit, but grosser. It's not just seawater or lake water. Yeah, it's nasty. Right. What speaking of that, which do you prefer, gi or no gi? Or do you have a preference?
I'm mostly training gi right now. That's just because, once again, I'm only able to train 2 times a week, maybe 3 times a week as it is. And our black belt doesn't do no gi necessarily, which is funny because he's predominantly a wrestler, but he's big into gi. He only comes to gi classes. He doesn't teach. I think we've done maybe 1 or 2 no gi classes with him.
Okay.
One of our blue belts teaches the no gi stuff. So I typically train gi right now, but I do enjoy some no gi. I enjoy the
Yeah.
athleticism. I enjoy the explosiveness of it, and it's a whole lot of fun. But I would say gi right now is what I'm more into.
Similar. Yeah, yeah. For morning, same with primarily Doogie. I think it's good for the older grappler. I can hold on to things and slow those youngsters down, and then I'll
Yeah,
throw. Usually, my problem is when I do Nogi, it's our open mat, so all the big dogs are there that compete and fight, and it hurts a lot more. And I'm like, but yeah, to your point, and there is the cool thing is it does translate. I mean, like I'll be like, man, my Nogi sucks, and I'm like, oh, I can actually kind of be wrestly if I need to instead of grabbing
yeah,
whatever. But it is, that's one thing my professor Tim Mann said, balance it, right? Try and do a bit of both. But it's a life balance too. Time, like, can you go? You're going in the morning, in the evening, one of the classes. Do you have time to go to the open mat? I would say that's one thing that I would recommend for everybody is if you have open mats, go and roll with folks you roll with. Because you'll learn each other's game, which is cool. I mean, you could still outsmart each other and get each other whatever, and quote win the role or whatever. But really to have somebody, and sometimes it seems like there's like two different academies, right? Like the AM and the PM group, or the folks that show up. You're like, wait, you go here. I haven't seen you for a while, so it's cool to get a different flavor of roles in, and to your point, help kind of level set and maybe reset yourself if you're like, oh, I'm like dominating my class, and then you go there like, oh shit,
yeah,
purple belt is, or that's what a high level blue belt is. You're like, oh damn, there's a whole different, it's a different spectrum. So that's cool.
yeah.
But yeah. So jujitsu, you talk about jujitsu quite a bit outside of jujitsu, which every jujitsu person does, but you do it on a microphone, and
Yeah.
so that's pretty cool. So what was the kind of catalyst that said, you know what, we should talk about this, and you started with your buddy John, Elbows Tight podcast. What was the catalyst to get y'all out there?
So when John and I first started, we just felt like we listened to podcasts, and it felt like all the jiu-jitsu podcasts were guys that have been doing it for 10, 15 years, high level guys, or higher level belt color. And I was like, man, no offense to these guys, but they're not going through what I'm going through right now.
Yeah.
Like, they I'm sure they remember it, but they're not in the trenches of the white belt days. And so John and I started our podcast as white belts because we wanted to capture our journey through jiu-jitsu and capture what we were going through and talk to other white belts about what they're going through, and kind of like build that community around, like, hey, we're there with you. Like, if you had, like, listen to this guy, he's here with you too. You know what I mean? So we didn't feel like there was any real resources that white belts or, maybe brand new blue belts were putting out there, good information, talking to other like-minded people. And so we felt there was a good reason to start one and just kind of like document ourselves and talk to, when we first started, it was all white belts. We talked to maybe one or two blue belts.
Okay.
So the first 12 episodes are all white belts, one blue belt, two blue belts. And then we had a brown belt who's now a black belt. And then it was more white belts until basically the pandemic. So I think episode 30 was when we really like kind of stepped out of like the typical white belt, and we started interviewing people outside of our community and started talking to, higher level black belts, because they do have a good insight on how you can get through it, obviously. So it kind of shifted from documenting our journey and other white belt journeys to more of being a resource that newer practitioners can come to hear how to get through these things, or what they should be doing to rank up, get better, roll better and stuff like that. So been doing it for like 4 years now.
That is a great idea of white belts on white belts, right? Because to your point, plus then and I imagine it was a challenge, like, hey, we're white belts and we're going to talk about jujitsu when everybody else is colored high level belts, right? Talking about jujitsu, and there's some shade that's thrown about, well, you shouldn't talk about it because you're just like on YouTube, other things are you read, right? So that's a bold thing and awesome, right? Like, hey, we're all walking this together. What was more of a challenge, being a new podcaster or being a white belt at the same time? Like,
it was definitely being a white belt. Podcast came to me pretty easily because, I mean, as you can tell, I don't stop talking most of the time. Uh,
Not a shy fella.
I enjoy talking to people. I
Good.
made online content since like 2017, 2016. And so it wasn't like making content wasn't new to me.
Cool.
And so and I was like I've been passionate about it since day one. So like when you have that passion and that excitement to do it, it's much easier to do it. You know what I mean?
Yep. For sure.
So, but wrapping that white belt around my waist was definitely is way, way harder for me. You know, some people might say podcasting because, you know, they don't know how to have a conversation in the sense of like interviewing people or providing value to people. But even just like jujitsu, with time, you learn. You know, you get 1% better every time. But you know, a year later, you're going to be miles ahead of where you were. So
that's a good point. That's kind of like you'll find out even if you're good at something, can you teach that thing, right? Which is not one and the same necessarily, but you can certainly learn to. You know, that's an interesting point. Like, you know, talking to other people, even talking by yourself, I feel like makes you be able to talk to people in the real world better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you're like, oh, either I sounded like crap right here, I did this, or ums and pops and all the stuff, right? When you're listening, you're like, oh, what are they doing? You know, and you're judgy, listen to people's sound quality or whatever. And I go, oh, I just did all those things. And then so then you're in a Zoom meeting going, you know, oh, smooth, or, you know, this or that, talking about different things. If there's other folks out there, and again, everybody, Elbows Tight podcast, check it out. Start listening from the beginning. What is an early lesson on the podcast side that you would share with somebody else interested in podcasting about whatever?
When it comes to actually podcasting,
like you know what, I want to do a podcast because those guys made it sound easy.
Spend a little bit more money than you think you need to on gear. John and I, when we first started, I kind of was like trying to go as cheap as possible. And I ended up I have like 3 of everything now because I've just slowly upgraded,
gotcha.
You know what I mean, over time, which has been nice because, you know, I didn't make that upfront cost, but if I would go back, I would, now I know what a good median is to where you're going to get, you know, much higher quality than what we were having. Even like your mic, the Audio Technica AT2020, that thing is amazing. You know what I mean? So, which is a very reasonable price microphone. It's like what, like $100, $120?
Yeah, 120. Yeah.
And so, I would spend a little bit more money than you think you need to,
right?
And also, just press record. Don't overthink it. Like, you know, I was doing so much research before we released our first episode. They're like, oh, if you're doing a podcast, you got to have 3 episodes in the bank. You got to have you got to have a trailer, have cover art, blah, 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 blah. All that can come later. None of it, like if you're starting it and you're not a big name, none of that matters. Just get started. Like you can always update your cover art. John left the podcast. He left the company. He left the business. So now I'm going through a complete rebranding. But I have all that back catalog of content that, you know, is still going to have the new branding on it. You know,
for sure.
So it doesn't matter that if my logo's changed over the years. It doesn't matter if my cover art's not the same. You just get 1% better, and the only way to get 1% better is by just doing it. So don't overthink it. Just go. Just have fun. It's a blast. So
that's a great point. Yeah, and it's nice because, you know, that stuff's pretty evergreen, right? Because jiu-jitsu is going to be around for a while. You know, your conversations with folks have, you know, beyond jiu-jitsu value of just how to talk to people. And then the podcast aspect is a great point of, you know, the paralysis by analysis thing is real. And some of I know some of them either I've got most feedback on or most, you know, downloads, is like me in a car, like, hey, I had this great idea when I was like on a trip. So I hit record. I was like, you know what, I'm just going to put that out. And it doesn't sound like this. It doesn't sound like the Audio Technica, but people reacted to it because it's at the end of the day, it's the content, right? And the audio quality. Yeah, if someone tunes in, there's clicks and pops, and it's like just hard to listen to because it hurts your ears. That's the problem. But that's great advice of like just put it out there, and you see that, you know, both from you and to your point, other folks that I mean, look at even, you know, I guess the big dog Joe Rogan. Like if you look at his early stuff, like it was awful looking. And of course now it's a little nicer than it used to.
$200 million podcast.
Yeah, I know. He's probably got some nice equipment.
Yeah.
But I mean, you can like to your point, the equipment we're recording on now, is MacBook Air, this your headphones and the mic you have. It doesn't take much, and just putting stuff in the world has value, right? It's going to hit somebody amazingly across the world somewhere. It's going to hit play, and that's a cool thing when you get into podcasting. Whatever platform, it's pretty much the same, right? It hosts a file, and then you can see where people listen to it. To see, someone in Mumbai, someone in Spain, you're like, it's pretty cool that anyone cares to listen to it or do that. So
yeah, absolutely.
Listen to this. Yeah.
But my phone's about to die, Kevin. I can't charge it because we're outside the hotel. So I just don't want it to die on you where we're having a mid conversation. So
that's cool. Well, you know what? That's a good segue then. So what's the new path for Elbows Tight? I know you got some merch, right? You got shirts and mugs and stickers and things. Where
yeah, so you can go to elbowstight.com if you want to buy any of our merch. Check our stuff out. Elbows Tight everywhere. Right now, like I said, I'm in a rebranding. I want to go more of the apparel side. I want Elbows Tight to kind of like cross all mediums or media. I don't want it to be just a podcast. I want it to be somewhere where new practitioners can go and they can get, relatable gear. They can get, cool shirts and listen to good content and watch good YouTube videos or whatever it is. I want it to be bigger than just a podcast. So that's what I'm doing right now. But elbowstight.com is where you can go to get merch. Elbows Tight on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, everywhere. So I want to be when people say Elbows Tight in jiu-jitsu, I want them to be like, I want them to think of me. So awesome. That's what I'm trying to build right now. So
Spotify, listen up.
even in class, people will be doing technique and then you're going to keep your elbows tight. And everyone looks at me and I'm like,
yeah, that's legit. Nice. Right on, man. That's cool. But Travis, thanks so much, man. Thanks for talking when you're on the road. And
I appreciate
it. Thanks for all the great content, man. I've listened. I'll keep listening.
I appreciate it
for being on. I'm sure we'll be in touch and like each other's posts on the line and everything. We're friends.
Yeah, right? Yeah, it's cool. It's official. So hey, thank you so much for letting me come on and talk to your listeners and be on your platform, man. You're doing great things. Your Breathe, Frame, Survive is the reason I came up with my 3, and I forgot what they were because I don't say them enough. But
we'll have. It looks like I think we'll have. I was on the Adobe Express looking at some T-shirt things too. I was like, you know what, that would make a cool shirt. So. And in different belt colors, so there may be some release. We'll see. And I'll link to this cool Philip Leitz who did that jiu-jitsu artwork. He's got a whole bunch of stuff, and I'll put all the links to your website, contacts, all that good stuff on kevtalkspod.com.